In this video, we'll talk about 3 levels of scrutiny: rational-based, intermediate scrutiny, and strict scrutiny. They are tests developed by the U.S. Supreme Court over time to answer a question: is a law, statute, or policy constitutional or not? With each test, the court is basically asking 2 questions, or we can say that the court is applying 2 factors. One factor is the purpose of the law, and the other factor is the means used by the law to achieve that purpose. The first factor is, why did the government pass the law? What was the purpose of the law? Was the law for legitimate purpose, important purpose, or compelling purpose? It's the easiest to show that the law was needed for legitimate purpose. It's the most difficult for the government to show that the law was needed for compelling purpose. With the rational basis test, the government only needs to show that the law has a legitimate purpose. With the intermediate scrutiny test, the government needs to show that the law has an important purpose. With strict scrutiny, the government needs to show that the law has a compelling purpose. The second factor the law applies is, what are the methods that the law uses to achieve the government purpose? Is there a rational relationship between the methods used by the law and the purpose the law is intended to achieve? Is there a substantial relationship between the methods used by the law and the purpose of the law? The most challenging question is whether the law is narrowly tailored. Is it the least restrictive way that the government can use to achieve its purpose? After we put these factors together, we have 3 levels of scrutiny. The rational basis review is the easiest test for the government. The court asks 2 questions. Does the law have a legitimate purpose? Is there a rational relationship between the methods used in the law and that legitimate purpose? The intermediate scrutiny is more challenging for the government. Now the government must show, first, the law has an important purpose. Second, the methods used in the law and the important purpose are substantially related to achieve that important purpose. The strict scrutiny is the most challenging test for the government. Here, the government has to prove, first, the law was necessary to achieve a compelling purpose, and second, the methods used in the law are the least restrictive way to achieve that compelling purpose. For a court to apply strict scrutiny, the government must have passed a law or implemented a policy that infringes upon a fundamental right. Fundamental rights are a group of rights that have been recognized by the Supreme Court as requiring a high degree of protection from government encroachment. Those fundamental rights are specifically identified in the Constitution, especially in the Bill of Rights, or under due process. Laws, statutes, and policies encroaching on the fundamental right generally must pass strict scrutiny to be upheld as constitutional. Another scenario for a court to apply strict scrutiny is that the government's law, statute, or policy involves a suspect classification. Suspect classifications include, but not limited to, race, national origin, and religion. So any policy that discriminates on the basis of race will get strict scrutiny. A policy that is facially neutral can also trigger strict scrutiny. I'll provide an example later in this video. Here is an example. A school district developed and implemented a student safety plan, which included a policy that allowed transgender students to use school bathroom and locker facilities that match their self-identified gender in the same manner that cisgender students use those facilities. A group of parents brought this policy to court, alleging that the policy violated the constitutional rights, including the right to privacy, the parental right to direct the education and upbringing of one's children, and the right to freely exercise one's religion. What test should the court use to decide whether this policy was constitutional or not? Should the court use the rational basis test or strict scrutiny test? To answer this question, the court asked two questions. First, what is the purpose of the policy? Is it legitimate purpose, important purpose, or compelling purpose? Second, what's the means used by the policy to achieve that purpose? Let's look at the purpose of this policy. It was argued that the policy had a legitimate purpose, which was to protect student safety and well-being and eliminate discrimination on the basis of sex and transgender status. Second, the means used in the policy was rationally related to a legitimate purpose. The parents argue that strict scrutiny should be applied here, but the district court and the Ninth Circuit rejected this argument. Instead, the court reviewed the policy by applying a rational basis review. The Ninth Circuit held that because the policy qualified as neutral and generally applicable, the policy was not subject to strict scrutiny. The court held that there is no 14th Amendment right to privacy to avoid all risk of intimate exposure to or by a transgender person who was assigned the opposite biological sex at birth. A policy that treats all students equally does not discriminate based on sex in violation of Title IX, and the normal use of privacy facilities does not constitute actionable sexual harassment under Title IX just because a person is transgender. The 14th Amendment does not provide a fundamental parental right to determine the bathroom policies of the public schools to which parents may send their children, either independent of the parental right to direct the upbringing and education of their children or encompassed by it. And the school district's policy is rationally related to a legitimate state purpose and does not infringe students' First Amendment's free exercise rights because it does not target religious conduct. Here is an example of strict scrutiny. In Coalition for TJ v. Fairfax County School Board 2022, a group of parents challenged Fairfax County School Board's new admission policy of the Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, which we call TJ here. In 2020 to 2021, the racial makeup of TJ's student body was 71.97% Asian American, 18.34% white, 3.05% Hispanic, and 1.77% Black. By contrast, the county-wide racial makeup of the Fairfax County Public Schools was 36.8% white, 27.1% Hispanic, 19.8% Asian American, and 10% Black. To diversify student enrollment, in December 2020, the school board changed the TJ admission policy. Among many changes, one change was the removal of 3 standardized tests. Another change was the added experience factors, which included an applicant's first attendance at a middle school deemed historically underrepresented at TJ. Second, eligibility for free and reduced price meals. Third, status as an English language learner. And fourth, status as a special education student. A group of parents brought this new admission policy to court, claiming that the admission changes at TJ would discriminate against Asian American students. To decide whether the new admission policy was constitutional or not, what scrutiny test should be applied here? Is it the rational basis test or the strict scrutiny test? A district judge applied strict scrutiny to decide whether this policy was constitutional or not. The first factor is the purpose of the new admission policy. The judge wrote, board members and high-level Fairfax County Public Schools actors did not disguise their desire for TJ to represent the racial demographics of Fairfax County or Northern Virginia as a whole. Whether accomplished overtly or via proxies, racial balancing is not a compelling interest. The Supreme Court has recognized only two interests as sufficiently compelling to justify race-based action, remedying past intentional discrimination and obtaining the benefits of diversity in higher education. The board's main problem is its focus on the goal to have TJ reflect the demographics of the surrounding area, described primarily in racial terms. Far from a compelling interest, racial balancing, for its own sake, is patently unconstitutional. The board cannot transform racial balancing into a compelling interest simply by relabeling it racial diversity. We've learned earlier in this video that any policy that discriminates on the basis of race will trigger strict scrutiny. A policy that is officially neutral can also trigger strict scrutiny. In this case, the judge argued that strict scrutiny applied to government actions not just when they contain express racial classifications, but also when, though race-neutral on their face, they are motivated by a racial purpose or object. The record demonstrates that the school board harbored such a purpose. Strict scrutiny, therefore, applies. Determining racial purpose demands a sensitive inquiry into such circumstantial and direct evidence of intent as may be available. Relevant factors include, first, the impact of the official action. Second, the historical background of the decision. Third, the specific sequence of events leading up to the challenged decision. And fourth, the legislative or administrative history, especially where there are contemporary statements by members of the decision-making body, minutes of its meetings, or reports. Impermissible racial intent need only be a motivating factor. It need not be the dominant or primary one. The board members need not harbor racial animus to act with discriminatory intent. To trigger strict scrutiny, the board need only pursue a policy at least in part because of, not merely in spite of, the policy's adverse effects upon an identifiable group. The district judge concluded that the school board's policy did not satisfy strict scrutiny. This means, according to the district judge, the new admission policy was unconstitutional. After learning 3 levels of scrutiny used by courts, here is a question for you all. During the COVID pandemic, a school district had a student vaccination mandate. The vaccine mandate provided that students who were 16 years or older and who were not fully vaccinated against the COVID-19 would not be permitted to participate in on-site education or extracurricular activities without a qualified exemption or conditional enrollment. The legal dispute was that the district's vaccine mandate allowed for medical exemptions, but not an exemption for religious belief. A parent alleged that the vaccine mandate violated his daughter's constitutional right under the Free Exercise Clause because the school district's vaccine mandate failed to exempt his daughter in light of her religious belief and by treating comparable secular activity more favorably than religious exercise. In this case, what level of scrutiny should be applied here? Should a court apply rational basis review, or should a court apply strict scrutiny to decide whether the school district's vaccine mandate constitutional or not?